My fiancé accidentally sent me a voice memo meant for his sister, and the moment I pressed play, I felt the ground tilt under my feet like a porch step I'd trusted for years, suddenly giving way. And if you've ever had your heart crushed by something small and ordinary that becomes a wrecking ball in a single breath, then you already understand the kind of night I'm about to tell you about. If stories like this speak to you and remind you that none of us are alone, your like or a kind comment means the world to me. It truly helps me keep sharing these moments and turning pain into strength for all of us. I am Elaine Bennett. I am 61. I know the quiet pride of making a life from the pieces other people overlooked, and I know the soft glow that returns when you believe you may have found love again after thinking that part of the road was already behind you. I want to start with the feeling of safety, because that is what made the impact so sharp. The way a warm kitchen makes cold air feel cruel the second the door opens. Because for months I lived inside a gentle illusion that had a sweet rhythm to it, a set of habits and glances and small kindnesses that looked like a future. And I let them surround me in the way a shawl settles on tired shoulders at the end of a long day. And in that comfort, I told myself that some miracles do come late and still count as miracles. I had my routines, my morning walks past the maples that leaned over the cul-de-sac, my coffee mug with the chip on the rim that always found my lip, my list of groceries that never changed because I had finally learned exactly what I liked and no longer bought things to please anyone else. Yet when I met Thomas at the garden center on a soggy Saturday in May and watched him wipe rain from his brow and tease the cashier about the petunias that looked half asleep, I felt the smallest door open somewhere I had nailed shut years earlier. I am not a woman who confuses gestures with character. I have lived long enough to watch charm run out of gas on a long hill. But I am also not immune to kindness. And Thomas had a way of holding a conversation like a lantern, steady and warm. And he remembered details that made me feel seen without being studied. And maybe you can already hear the trap in that. Maybe you are warning me from your couch. But I will tell you this honestly. I wanted to believe, and sometimes wanting is all it takes to blur the edges that should be sharp. We merged our weekends slowly. First the farmer's market, then the antique mall where he pretended to hate browsing, but always found a bowl or a clock that he made fun of until I laughed too hard to resist it. Then a soft rhythm of Sunday dinners where he'd insist on washing dishes and hum something that sounded like a song from a road trip we had not taken yet. And in those small domestic moments, I let my bones rest and told myself that late-life love has a quieter music, but just as much depth. It is almost funny, in the bitter way that isn't funny at all, how something as silly as a notification chime can rewrite months of memory, because that is all it took. A small sound on my phone at 9:42 on a Tuesday, the letters of his name across the screen, the blue bubble with an audio wave locked inside it, and me sitting on the sofa in my robe with a paperback face down on my lap, thinking he might be reminding me to pick up the rosemary or telling me he was running late. And instead, it was a memo meant for someone else. A casual stripe of sound pushed across by the same finger that had traced my wrist the night before, while we decided whose house we would use for Thanksgiving. I pressed the icon without thinking because we were in that stage where the ordinary is already shared. Passwords for streaming services and favorite takeout order, and the kind of trust that makes you forget to check which way the door swings. The first seconds were a mess of car noise and something like a turn signal, and his voice pitching higher to be heard over it. And at first, I could not tell the context, only that he was speaking quickly and that the lightness he reserved for strangers was gone. And then I heard her name, his sister's name, Jacinta. And I understood that this was not a note to me at all. This was a window I had not asked to open. And for a heartbeat, I almost stopped it the way you hold your palm up when a photograph loads on a screen and you know you cannot unsee it. But curiosity and fear make twins that run faster than good sense. And the sound kept going in that careless way the world delivers its worst moments. He spoke about me as if I were a project with a budget and a timeline. He spoke about my age with a softness that made it worse. He spoke about what I brought into his life as if kindness and money share the same drawer. And I felt my cheeks heat, not from anger at first, but from a shame so old it remembered my maiden name. I have been here before. Not this exact room, but this feeling. The way your stomach falls and then steadies because it recognizes the pattern. The way your body goes quiet and your brain starts making lists. And if you have lived through betrayal, you know that it is not the sharpness that breaks you, but the familiarity. The dull recognition that makes you whisper to yourself that you should have known. And maybe you did know. There were details I had filed where I keep the things I never want to examine. The slightly off jokes about retirement. The way he always wanted to pick up the check and then act as if the generosity ran one way. The little questions about my house and my will that he wrapped in concern, the way you wrap glass in newspaper. And I am not calling him a villain. Not yet. I am only saying that the memo slid these pieces together like a child's puzzle, until a picture I had avoided became clear. I did not stop the audio. I let every second play out while the room changed around me. The lamplight suddenly cheap, the rug suddenly loud, the framed photos on my bookshelf suddenly witnesses. And I sat very still because there is a kind of stillness that is not weakness. It is the room in the mind where you go to make the next right decision. And I went there. I sat in that room and felt my pulse slow, and I understood that nothing I would say tonight could repair what he had already said today. It is a strange comfort to realize that a decision has already been made by the truth itself. You do not need to scream or demand or collect apologies like coupons. You only need to accept the terms and do the work of leaving with your dignity folded neatly like a sweater you loved once, but will not wear again. I will not share the worst lines he used because repeating them would only stain the air we are breathing together right now, and also because I am done giving his words any more authority than they stole. But I will tell you that in the mess of it, I heard another kind of confession, the accidental truth of a man who needed me for reasons that had nothing to do with love. And for me, that was the part that loosened whatever knot kept me hoping. Because once you see the machine and not the miracle, you cannot go back. You cannot pretend the rabbit was not already inside the hat. I sat there for a long time after the memo ended, staring at the progress bar as if it might load a different ending. And then I did the smallest, yet most important thing. I set the phone face down and breathed in and out until my breath belonged to me again. What if I had confronted him right then? What if I had marched into that scene with the righteous thunder so many of us train in the mirror? What if I had demanded he explain himself and watched him build a bridge out of excuses, and I had walked across it because I was tired and wanted the other side? What if I had done that? Would my life be different now? Would I still be in the house that held both our toothbrushes and the leftover wine he said we should save for Friday? Would I have swallowed one more insult dressed as concern and told myself that love means compromise even when the only thing compromised is your self-respect, perhaps? But I have learned that the most powerful question is not what if I stay, it is what if I leave. I will tell you this as a promise to myself, said out loud so I cannot take it back. I did not confront him that night. I did not send a storm of messages. I did not call his sister and set the record straight. I did not do any of that. I sat in my quiet living room and let the truth sink all the way down where it could anchor me. And then I began to plan. By the time the clock touched midnight, I knew the outlines of my morning, the bag I would pull from the high shelf, the folder with documents that matter, the simple note that would say everything without saying too much. And above all the way, I would step through my own front door and remember that my legs still carried me where I asked them to go. And somewhere behind the hurt, a small flame of clarity warmed my chest, not anger, not yet, but a clean resolve that felt like a window cracked open in a stuffy room. I did not sleep more than an hour. I did not need to, because sometimes rest comes in the form of decision, and I had that. And as the night thinned and the first trace of morning drew a line along the blinds, I stood and stretched and listened to the house hold its breath. And in that hush, I let myself smile, not because I enjoyed any of this, but because I knew something he could not imagine, that by sunrise I would be gone, and what waited for him after that would not be a tantrum or a scene, but a quiet plan he would never see coming. When I look back now, it almost feels like I was living in a carefully painted picture, the kind you find at a flea market, faded in some corners, but still charming enough that you hang it in your living room because it makes you believe in a softer world. And for me, that picture was the romance I had with Thomas, the man who made me believe love could return in the last chapters of life. It began with the smallest steps, casual invitations that turned into weekends together, dinners that stretched into long conversations, and slow evenings where the sound of dishes being washed felt as intimate as a kiss. I told myself that I had finally been given a partner who understood that love is not fireworks at this age. It is a candle steady against the draft. In those first months, I walked lighter. The neighbors even noticed. My friend Margaret teased me about the spring in my step when we met for coffee, and I brushed it off with a laugh. But inside, I felt like a young woman again, full of possibility. The world looked different when I pushed a cart down the grocery aisles with Thomas beside me, reaching for the same loaf of bread or reminding me to grab the strawberries he said I loved. I would catch myself daydreaming about holidays together, about family blending in ways that looked easy in my head, about mornings where his humming became the soundtrack to my kitchen. The illusion was stitched together from dozens of these small scenes, and I wore it like a quilt made to keep me warm at night. There were signs, tiny threads that didn't match the pattern, moments when his jokes about age landed harder than he intended, or when he brushed off my careful budgeting with a laugh as though money appeared on its own. There was the time at the hardware store when Thomas joked to the cashier that he needed to learn how to fix my old house before I left it all to him, and even though he said it with a grin, something cold pricked at me that I smoothed over because I wanted to believe in the better version of him. I told myself that all couples have moments, that sarcasm sometimes covers nerves, that no man is perfect. But when I replay those months in my mind, I see the contrast so clearly. I was offering him a calm harbor after years of his restless drifting, and he was offering me the image of devotion I had always longed for. The contrast is what hurts most now, the way I thought we were equals when, in truth, I was balancing scales he had already tipped in his favor. I shared my table, my time, and my heart, and he shared the version of himself he wanted me to see. The illusion was not just about him, though. It was about me, too, because I chose to ignore the uneasy tug in my chest that whispered, maybe this picture was too perfect. I would sit in my garden sometimes, watching the roses climb along the trellis, and imagine how Thomas would fit into my future, whether he would kneel beside me pulling weeds, or whether he would simply smile and hand me the iced tea I loved on hot afternoons. These gentle images lulled me into trust, into the belief that we were walking toward something shared and sacred. I let myself believe that the mistakes of my past, the heartbreaks and betrayals, had finally led me to a man who would hold my hand through the last stretch of the road with tenderness and respect. That was the illusion, and illusions are powerful because they mirror back what we most need to see. In my case, it was hope, and hope blinded me just long enough to miss the way his eyes sometimes flicked toward my checkbook when I set it down on the counter, or how his stories about retirement always centered on what we could do with my resources, never his. I missed those details, or rather, I dismissed them. And by doing so, I gave him permission to build his comfort inside my trust. I know this now, but back then, all I felt was gratitude that life had surprised me with someone like Thomas. And so the picture kept growing, brushstroke by brushstroke, until the night that voice memo arrived and shattered the canvas into shards I could never piece back together. But before that moment, before the curtain pulled back, I was a woman who believed she had finally stumbled into a happy ending. It was an ordinary Tuesday evening, the kind of evening where the minutes slide quietly into each other and you don't expect anything more dramatic than deciding between chamomile tea or cocoa before bed. And yet it was that night when the world I thought I had built with Thomas cracked wide open with a single sound. My phone chimed at 9:42, a small notification from Thomas, and without hesitation, I tapped play, expecting a reminder about groceries or maybe a soft goodnight message. What I heard instead was the careless unraveling of everything I believed about us. The first seconds were messy, the background filled with car noise and the clicking rhythm of a turn signal. But then his voice cut through, sharper than I had ever heard it in our home. He was speaking quickly, and the tone was not the tender one he reserved for me. It was the clipped, casual way people talk when they feel no need to impress. And when he said Jacinta's name, I froze. This was not for me. I had stumbled into a private corridor of his life where I was never meant to stand. I told myself to stop the recording, to respect what was not mine, but curiosity fused with dread in a way that made me sit rigid. The phone pressed close as though holding it tighter might change the words. And then they came, clear and undeniable. He spoke about me as though I were a transaction, a woman with assets and habits he could manage, a convenience dressed up as companionship. He mocked my age lightly, not cruelly enough to make him sound like a stranger, but cruelly enough to strip the tenderness from every compliment he had ever given me. He joked about how easily I trusted, how I was already folding him into the fabric of my future, without question. I cannot explain the sensation of hearing someone you love describe you to another person in terms that make you feel smaller, less human, more like a ledger entry than a woman with a heartbeat. The words slipped into my ears and sank down into my chest, heavy, suffocating, and yet oddly familiar, because part of me had always known there was a hidden script running beneath the one I lived on the surface. My hands grew cold even though the house was warm, and the tea beside me cooled untouched as I sat perfectly still, listening to the man who held my hand on Sunday mornings reveal himself to be something else entirely on a Tuesday night. He laughed as he told Jacinta that I was predictable, that I liked routines, that I wasn't difficult to handle. He said it as though those were weaknesses rather than the strengths I'd cultivated after decades of holding myself together through storms. He mentioned my home as if it were already half his, spoke of holidays as if I were financing them, and dismissed my independence with the wave of his voice as though it were a fragile decoration he could move aside whenever it suited him. I did not cry, not then. My body chose silence over tears. There's a kind of quiet that grows inside you when pain is too heavy to move, and that is where I sat, inside that quiet, listening to a voice that had once sounded like comfort become the sound of betrayal. I let the entire memo play, even the tail end where he shifted to another subject, laughing with Jacinta about something trivial, as if the dismantling of my dignity were no more important than the traffic he was sitting in. When the recording ended, the silence in my living room felt louder than any storm I had ever weathered. My breath came slow, deliberate, as though I needed to prove to myself that I was still here, still real, even after hearing what he truly thought of me. My eyes moved around the room. The lamp he once said made the space cozy, the blanket he pulled over my shoulders when I dozed on the couch, the framed photographs that captured smiles now soured by context. And everything seemed changed, as if his words had contaminated not just my heart, but the very air in my home. I knew instantly that I could not confront him that night. To storm into his house or call his phone demanding answers would only give him space to twist, to explain, to soften his betrayal into something survivable. No, I realized the power lay in silence, in absorbing the truth without giving him the chance to repaint it. And so I sat there, heart pounding but face calm, as though I were the last guest at a dinner party, listening to echoes fade. What if I had deleted the message, pretended I had never heard it, chosen the path of denial for the sake of comfort? What if I had told myself that all couples say unkind things when they believe no one else is listening? Those thoughts flickered across my mind, tempting as they were, but they were no match for the clarity that had already begun to grow like a flame. I knew in that moment that I could not unknow the truth, and I would never look at Thomas the same way again. It is strange how a single accident can become a revelation, how a slip of the finger can open the door to the hidden architecture of a person's soul. That night, I discovered not just who Thomas really was, but also who I still was. A woman who had survived too much to let herself be reduced to an object of convenience. And as the clock crept past 10, I began to understand that this memo was not the end of something. It was the beginning of a plan. I did not sleep that night, not in the way people imagine sleep as rest, because how can you rest when the words of someone you trusted are still circling your head like vultures waiting for you to collapse? I lay in the dark, staring at the faint glow of the streetlight bleeding through the blinds, my body heavy under the blanket, but my mind refusing to settle. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Thomas's voice again, that casual tone as he told Jacinta that I was easy, predictable, convenient. Each replay of that memo carved the truth deeper into me, and instead of healing, it widened the wound until it throbbed in rhythm with my pulse. I turned from side to side, trying to escape my own thoughts. But the bed felt foreign now, like a stranger's guest room where nothing belonged to me. The pillow that once carried the scent of lavender oil now smelled faintly of his cologne, a detail that made my stomach twist. The blanket that he had pulled up to my shoulders so many times now felt like a weight I didn't want. I could not find comfort anywhere in that space, so I sat up and let the night pour into me. What if I stayed, I asked myself. What if I forgave him before he even knew I had something to forgive? Would the days ahead be filled with me second-guessing every smile, every word, every compliment? Would I always wonder if I was being played for a fool? The answer rose in me like a tide. Yes, I would. And what if I left, truly left, before dawn broke, before he even realized I had heard the truth? Could I do it? Could I summon the strength to walk away from the dream I had carefully allowed myself to believe? That answer came too, and though it was wrapped in fear, it also carried a spark of clarity. I thought about the younger version of myself, the one who once stayed too long in relationships that diminished her, the one who let men speak over her, dismiss her, reduce her to someone useful but never cherished. I thought about my 20s with David, my ex-husband, who treated my devotion like an endless resource he was entitled to drain. I remembered my 40s when I let another man linger in my life long after he had shown me he could not honor me. In each case, I had compromised my dignity for the illusion of companionship, and in each case, I had paid the price. The memory of those years pressed against me like ghosts, reminding me of the lessons I swore I had learned. I whispered into the silence that I would not repeat those mistakes. Not at 61, not after building myself back from too many heartbreaks. The thought steadied me, like a hand at the small of my back, guiding me toward resolve. I got out of bed and padded across the floor, barefoot, the hardwood cold under my feet, and I began to gather the essentials. My passport tucked in the top drawer, my bank documents sealed in a folder, a few changes of clothes, practical and simple. I didn't need much. What mattered was leaving before he had the chance to twist my clarity into confusion. The clock on my dresser showed 2 a.m, and I knew then that sleep would never come. So I made tea instead. As I held the warm mug between my hands, I stared out the window at the quiet street, the houses all dark and still, and I felt a strange mix of grief and determination. The grief came from the loss of the dream I had nurtured with Thomas, but the determination came from a deeper place, the part of me that refused to be mocked, refused to be reduced. I asked myself again, what if I stay? What if I leave? And each time the answer was clearer. Staying meant shrinking. Leaving meant reclaiming. I thought of women like me, women who had given and given until they had nothing left, women who had stayed too long because the fear of loneliness seemed heavier than the weight of betrayal. I thought of how many of them might be listening one day to this very story, nodding in recognition, whispering, "Yes, I know that feeling too." That thought gave me courage, because walking away was not just about me. It was about proving to myself and to anyone who might hear that we do not have to settle for being convenient in someone else's story. By 4 a.m, I had packed a small bag and set it by the door. The sky outside was still dark, but the faintest line of silver touched the horizon, promising dawn. I sat in the quiet, breathing slowly, my heart still aching but my mind calmer now. The decision had been made, and decisions carry their own kind of peace. I wrote a short note, just one sentence, nothing dramatic. I heard the truth, and I will not stay. I placed it on the kitchen counter where he could not miss it. The house felt different now, not like a home, but like a stage where the play had ended and the curtain had dropped. I looked around one last time, at the photographs, the dishes in the sink, the quilt folded at the end of the couch, and I whispered goodbye, not to him, but to the version of myself who had believed his illusion. By the time the first light of morning spilled through the blinds, I was ready. I would walk out that door, and when I did, I would not just leave Thomas behind. I would leave behind every echo of a woman who once thought she had to settle for less than she deserved. The dawn came softly, the way it always does, but that morning it felt like the earth itself was whispering to me, telling me it was time to move. I stood at the bedroom door and looked at Thomas one last time, his body sprawled across the bed in careless comfort, his face relaxed in the kind of peace I no longer recognized as genuine. For a moment, I simply watched, remembering all the mornings I had woken beside him and believed those lines on his face were markers of safety, when in truth they were only shadows cast by my own wishful thinking. He stirred once in his sleep, shifting, and for the briefest second fear touched me. The fear that he would open his eyes, see the bag at my side, and shatter my plan with questions and pleas. But he did not wake, and in that stillness I slipped away like a ghost, leaving behind a body that no longer served her. Every sound seemed louder than usual. The quiet zip of my bag, the click of the lock on the front door, the creak of the floorboards under my careful steps. But no sound came from him. It felt as though the universe itself was conspiring to let me leave undisturbed, as though every breath of morning air was clearing a path. I placed the note on the kitchen counter, the one I had written in the silent hours of the night. I heard the truth, and I will not stay. There was no anger in those words, only clarity. I didn't need to explain myself to a man who had already explained me away behind my back. When I stepped outside, the cool air wrapped around me like an ally. The neighborhood was still asleep, curtains drawn, driveways empty, the world suspended in that quiet hour where nothing yet demands your attention. My car sat in the driveway, waiting, and as I loaded my bag into the back seat, I felt the weight of the decision settle into my bones. Heavy, yes, but steady, like a foundation being poured. I slid into the driver's seat, rested my hands on the steering wheel, and let out a breath I didn't realize I had been holding for months. The drive itself was short, but the freedom it gave me felt endless. Each turn of the wheels was like shedding another layer of false comfort, another layer of illusion. I remembered the times Thomas had driven this same road with me in the passenger seat, his hand brushing mine, his voice humming to the radio, and I thought about how I had mistaken those simple gestures for depth. Now the silence of the car was louder than any song, and in that silence I heard my own strength rising. I didn't cry. The tears had been there once, years ago, in other departures, other endings. This time there was no room for tears because I was not leaving in desperation. I was leaving in power. It felt like walking out of a burning building without a single singe on my skin, like stepping from shadows into sunlight. The pain was there, yes, but it was no longer the kind that chained me. It was the kind that reminded me I was alive and capable of more than I had been told. By the time I reached the edge of town, the sun had begun to climb above the horizon, painting the sky in streaks of rose and gold. I pulled over for a moment, just to watch. There is something about a sunrise that feels like a personal message, a reminder that no matter how dark the night has been, the light will always return. I let the rays warm my face and whispered to myself that I had done it. I had walked away, and now the rest of my life was mine to shape. It wasn't just an escape. It was a quiet declaration of independence. I knew Thomas would wake to find the note, and panic would follow. He would call, he would text, he would demand explanations, and I would have the choice of silence. For once in my life, the power would be in my hands. My quiet escape was not just about leaving him behind. It was about reclaiming every piece of myself I had ever given away too freely. And as I drove on, the road stretching wide and open before me, I began to think not just of what I had left, but of the plan I was already building in the back of my mind. A plan Thomas would never see coming. I drove until the city disappeared behind me, the highway stretching like a ribbon of possibility, and with every mile I felt my heartbeat steady into something stronger, not just relief, but resolve. I was not running away. I was stepping into a strategy, one that had begun forming in the shadows of my sleepless night, and now took clearer shape with every passing landmark. Thomas had underestimated me. He had mistaken kindness for weakness, trust for naivety, and stability for stagnation. He thought I would cling to him because of loneliness. He never once considered that I might be a woman with resources, history, and a sharp memory that could be transformed into power. I pulled into a small roadside cafe, ordered black coffee, and opened the folder I'd packed. Inside were the details of my accounts, investments I had quietly built after years of working double shifts and saving what others might have squandered. He didn't know the extent of what I had, and that ignorance would be my shield. While he thought I was offering him comfort, I had also been maintaining control of my own financial life. My house was in my name alone, my savings were substantial, and I had never once allowed his signature near my future. He assumed otherwise, and I intended to let him stew in that assumption until it consumed him. The plan did not start with revenge, it started with protection. I changed passwords, secured important files, and alerted my bank. The clerk on the other end of the phone didn't know the story, but her polite confirmation of each safeguard felt like a lock sliding into place. Then came the deeper step. Preparing not just to shield myself, but to expose him if necessary. I thought of Margaret, my oldest friend, who had once worked at the courthouse and still knew her way around public records. She could help me uncover any debts, any lawsuits, any hidden truths about Thomas that he had never confessed. As I sipped the bitter coffee, I felt the weight of memory press against me. I remembered all the times I had settled in the past, all the times I had walked away quietly without reclaiming what was mine. Not this time. This time, I would not only leave, I would ensure that he understood exactly what he had lost and why. The plan was simple in its outline, but powerful in its execution. Secure my world, strip away his false sense of control, and when the time was right, let him see himself for what he was, exposed and powerless. By the second cup of coffee, I began to write down the steps. First, I would remain silent. Nothing unsettles a manipulator more than silence. He would expect tears, accusations, scenes. But silence would leave him spinning. Second, I would lean on my network, friends, colleagues, even old neighbors. People who had watched me rebuild my life before and would gladly stand beside me again. Third, I would wait. Patience is not passive. Patience is strategic. The more frantic Thomas became, the more information he would reveal in his desperation to pull me back. It was strange, almost ironic, that the man who mocked my predictability had no idea how unpredictable I could be when pushed. He had seen the soft surface, but not the steel underneath. He thought of me as a quilt, when in truth I was a fortress. And the beauty of the plan was not in its cruelty, but in its clarity. I did not need to destroy him. I only needed to stop supporting the illusion he had built on my back. Without me, his life would crumble on its own. And here, in the quiet of that cafe, surrounded by the smell of bacon and coffee, I paused for a moment to think of all the women like me, the ones who had been underestimated, dismissed, or mocked by men who thought age made us weaker. If you are listening and nodding because you know this feeling, I want to tell you how much your presence matters to me. Your likes, your comments, even just your listening ear. They remind me that these stories are not wasted, that they mean something. Thank you for being here, truly. I closed the folder, tucked it back into my bag, and smiled faintly at my reflection in the cafe window. The woman staring back was not broken. She was calculating, patient, and more alive than she had felt in years. I thought of Thomas still asleep when I left, and I almost laughed, imagining his confusion when he realized the foundation of his comfort had vanished. He would never see this plan coming because he never believed I had one in me, and that would be my greatest advantage. By the time the sun was high that morning, my phone began to buzz, the sound sharp and insistent against the hush of the cafe where I had stopped to rest. At first it was just one vibration, then another, and soon the steady rhythm of panic played across the tabletop as the phone rattled slightly with each call. I didn't even need to check the screen to know it was Thomas. Still, I glanced down, and there it was, his name lighting up my phone over and over again. Missed call, voicemail, text, another text. His silence in sleep had turned into desperation the moment he found the note on my kitchen counter. The first message came through short and sharp, clipped like he was trying to sound in control. "Elaine, what is this? Where are you?" The second one was longer, frantic, the tone higher, as though he had suddenly realized the ground beneath him was unstable. "Please call me. This is a misunderstanding. I can explain." By the third, his voice cracked in the voicemail, pleading in a way I had never heard before. "Don't do this. We can fix it. I need you." The irony stung. The same man who told Jacinta I was predictable and convenient was now reduced to begging, his bravado collapsing like wet paper. I held the phone in my hand, feeling the buzz against my palm, and my skin prickled as though the vibration itself were trying to crawl inside me. I did not respond. I let the phone flash and chime, my silence a shield and a weapon all at once. Each unanswered call tightened the net around him, not me. He wanted the drama, the confrontation, the tears and the shouting, the stage where he could twist his words into something survivable. But all he got was quiet, and quiet has a way of echoing louder than any argument. The waitress at the cafe, a young woman with dark curls pinned back, noticed the phone buzzing endlessly and gave me a small, knowing look, the kind women give each other when no words are needed. She refilled my coffee without asking, the steam rising between us, and for a moment I felt a silent kinship, as if she understood that sometimes the strongest thing a woman can do is nothing at all. As the hours passed, his messages piled up, his tone shifting wildly like a man rifling through masks. Anger bled into sorrow, promises melted into threats. "You're overreacting." Then, "I love you. I made a mistake." Then, "If you don't come back, you'll regret it." Each swing only revealed his panic more clearly. His words were not about me. They were about him, about the fear of losing the comfort I had unknowingly provided. I watched the sunlight crawl across the cafe wall, listened to the clink of dishes and the low hum of conversations around me, and realized how small his noise looked compared to the vastness of the world outside our bubble. Across the street, I saw my neighbor Linda by chance. She had driven into town that morning, and when she spotted me through the cafe window, she waved brightly, her face full of ordinary cheer. I waved back, my heart swelling with something bittersweet. To her, I was just having coffee, but inside I was dismantling the scaffolding of a life I almost built with a man who was unraveling in real time. By evening, his desperation had deepened. Another voicemail landed, his voice cracking now, ragged and raw. "Elaine, please, I can't lose you." "You don't understand. I need you in my life. Just talk to me." That word, need, landed with a weight he probably never intended. He did need me, but not for love. He needed the stability, the trust, the resources, the softness of someone who had built herself into a safe place. He needed me because without me, he had nothing to steady himself. The phone buzzed again, and I let it buzz against the wood of the table, the sound like a wasp trapped in a jar. I did not flinch. I let the silence stretch long and unbroken, because silence was my answer. He wanted a fight. I gave him none. He wanted a stage. I gave him an empty theater. And the more he shouted into that void, the more he revealed himself for what he truly was. A man who only seemed strong when someone else was holding him up. The next morning I woke early, the motel curtains barely holding back the pale light of dawn, and before I even made coffee I checked my phone. More missed calls, more voicemails, more texts from Thomas piling up like fallen leaves. Some angry, some tearful, some written in the clipped sentences of a man trying to appear calm when panic was already eating him alive. I didn't answer. Instead, I called my oldest friend, Margaret, the one person who had seen me through my divorce, through the lean years, through the nights when loneliness pressed too hard. She still worked part-time at the county courthouse, a place where paper trails told the stories people tried to bury. I asked her to look up Thomas. She hesitated only a second before agreeing, her voice low and protective, promising to call me back in an hour. While I waited, I walked outside into the cool air. The parking lot smelled faintly of asphalt and morning dew, the hum of traffic on the nearby highway steady and distant. I sipped the weak motel coffee and thought about how easily I had believed the surface of Thomas. The charm, the attentiveness, the way he seemed to fold into my routine so seamlessly. It had all felt so real, and yet here I was, standing alone, waiting for confirmation of what my gut already knew. There were cracks running through him, cracks I had chosen not to see. As the minutes dragged on, I remembered a moment from months earlier, the time he made a joke to my neighbor Linda about how he hoped I'd keep him in the lifestyle he was getting used to. I had laughed along, embarrassed, brushing it off as humor. Now, in the sharp light of hindsight, it felt more like confession than jest. When the phone rang again, Margaret's voice was tight. She told me she had found records of late payments, credit card balances that stretched into the thousands, even a small claim suit from a contractor he had never paid. There was nothing catastrophic, but enough to show me the truth. Thomas was not the steady, secure man he pretended to be. He was drowning, and I had been his life raft. My silence on the phone that morning gave her the answer she needed. She whispered, "You did the right thing leaving." I thanked her, feeling both vindicated and hollow. It wasn't that I enjoyed knowing I had been right. It was that the truth stripped away even the last fragments of illusion. The rest of that day became a haze of small revelations. I thought back to dinners where he had insisted on paying, but had always used a card, never cash. The way he had once asked me, half joking, about updating my will. The subtle curiosity about the balance in my retirement fund when I mentioned a statement arriving in the mail. All those details I had dismissed as harmless now lined up like arrows pointing toward the truth. He wasn't with me because he loved me. He was with me because he needed someone to steady the cracks in his own life. and when I imagined him back in his kitchen, pacing, checking his phone, desperate for me to answer, I felt the power shift entirely. He thought he was the one holding control, but he had never seen me step fully into mine. That evening, I drove to a quiet overlook outside of town, the sky burning orange and violet as the sun sank. I sat in my car with the windows rolled down, the scent of pine and dust drifting in, and let myself breathe. My silence had already begun to unravel him, and now the truth about his debts and his lies gave me a new kind of strength. I was no longer just the woman who left quietly at dawn. I was the woman who had uncovered the hidden map of who he really was. And the more I pieced it together, the clearer my plan became. I would not just walk away. I would make sure Thomas saw himself without the mask he had worn so carefully. That was the revenge he would never forget. The shift came quietly, without fireworks or confrontation, and that was exactly the power of it. I did not announce anything to Thomas. I simply stopped being the foundation he had been standing on. The accounts he assumed he had access to were locked. The invitations he expected me to extend, dinners, gatherings, holidays, never came. The phone stayed silent on my end, each unanswered call another brick added to the wall between us. What he had counted on most, my steady presence, was gone, and the absence gnawed at him louder than any words I could have shouted. Within a week, his messages changed. No more threats or anger, only panic seeping through. He begged, not with the voice of a man in love, but with the desperation of someone watching his safety net vanish. He wrote that bills were piling up, that he felt lost, that he didn't know how to get back on his feet without me. I read every word, but my fingers never typed a reply. Instead, I saved them, each one a reminder of the truth I had finally embraced. One afternoon, while sipping coffee on Margaret's porch, I scrolled through his voicemails. In each one, I heard less of the confident man who once mocked me to Jacinta, and more of the fragile man he truly was, a man who mistook dependence for love. Listening in the calm of her garden, with wind chimes tinkling overhead, I realized the plan had already worked. My silence was louder than his noise. My absence was undoing him more effectively than any confrontation ever could. The turning point was not about revenge in the dramatic sense. It was about balance, about watching the scales tip back where they belonged. For the first time in years, I felt light, unburdened, steady on my own feet, and in that clarity, I knew the final step would not be loud or cruel. It would be simple, certain, and final. In the end, there was no dramatic showdown, no last-minute confrontation. Thomas unraveled on his own, just as I knew he would. His desperate calls dwindled into silence when it became clear I was never coming back, and in that silence he had to face himself, not the version he had shown the world, but the hollow man beneath. The money he counted on, the comfort he expected, the companionship he thought was guaranteed, all of it was gone. And the truth was, he had lost it by his own hand, not mine. For me, the victory was quiet but profound. I didn't need to see his face or hear his excuses. I carried the knowledge that I had chosen myself over illusion, that I had walked away with dignity intact, and that was enough. Sitting one evening on Margaret's porch, the scent of lilacs heavy in the air, I felt a calmness settle in me, deeper than anything I had known in years. I realized revenge isn't always about striking back. Sometimes it's about letting someone choke on the emptiness they created for themselves. As the days passed, I began to imagine my future not in terms of what I had lost, but of what I had reclaimed. My mornings were my own again, my routines no longer shadowed by doubt. I found myself smiling at small things, the neighbor's dog chasing butterflies, the warm weight of a book in my lap, the simple peace of knowing that my heart was once again mine alone. I hadn't just left Thomas. I had left behind the part of me willing to accept less than I deserved. And so, my story closes not with rage, but with clarity. Evil did not win. The man who mocked me for being predictable never predicted this. That silence would be the sharpest blade, and dignity the sweetest form of justice. If you are listening and find yourself nodding because you have felt something similar, know this: your worth does not expire, and your strength is greater than you believe. Sometimes the bravest revenge is walking away, and sometimes the greatest victory is peace. And before I let this story rest, I just want to talk to you heart to heart. If you felt something while listening, if any part of my journey reminded you of your own, it would mean so much if you left a comment and shared your thoughts. I really do read them, and they make me feel less alone. And if you tap that like button or subscribe, it helps me keep bringing you more stories like this. Stories that remind us of our strength, our dignity, and the way we rise again no matter what. Your support isn't just numbers on a screen. It's the reason I can keep telling these truths.